On a cold September morning in 1851, deep in the wilderness of upstate New York, a group of hunters stumbled upon something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Inside a hidden log cabin, tucked away in the dark forests of the Adirondack Mountains, they found a boy, no older than 12, thin, pale, and wild-eyed. But it wasn't his appearance that terrified them. It was his voice. The child spoke in sounds that no one could recognize, clicks, guttural noises, strange rhythms that seemed closer to an animal's cry than human speech. And when the men searched the cabin, what they found made their blood run cold. Fragments of bones laid out in deliberate patterns, strange symbols carved into every wall, and journals filled with writing that hinted at practices too dark to describe. Local authorities quickly locked away most of the records from that discovery, stamping them with a single chilling label. The Harwick Incident. Access restricted by order of the state. Today, more than 170 years later, the truth about what happened to the Harwick family is still buried in old county archives. But what little survives tells a story so disturbing that even seasoned historians hesitate to speak of it. This is the story of Benjamin Harwick, the boy in the cabin, and the language that should never have existed. The world of 1851. To understand how such a horrifying discovery could take place, we need to look at the world Benjamin was born into. In 1851, New York was caught between two very different realities. Cities like Albany and New York were buzzing with progress, steamships churned up the Hudson River, factories grew by the day, and telegraph wires stitched communities together with instant communication. But just a few hundred miles north, the Adirondack wilderness was another world entirely. Stretching over 6 million acres, it was a vast, untamed land of dense forests, jagged mountains, and hidden valleys. Many areas were unmapped. Entire families could vanish into the woods, never to be seen again. This was the wilderness the Harwick family chose. Ezra and Sarah Harwick. Ezra Harwick wasn't an ordinary pioneer. Born in Vermont, he had once been a schoolteacher, educated and articulate. His wife, Sarah Pemberton, was also unusually educated for a woman of her time. Together, they shared a deep distrust of society. They had lived through the financial panics and social unrest of the 1830s. They had seen neighbors ruined overnight, traditional values replaced by greed, and communities torn apart by change. To Ezra and Sarah, America was rushing headlong into corruption. So they made a radical decision, to leave it all behind. In the winter of 1836, they packed up what little they had, including a small library of books, and disappeared into the Adirondack wilderness. Their plan wasn't just survival, it was philosophy. Ezra believed that by cutting themselves off from the outside world, they could raise a family untouched by the corruption of civilization. The hidden valley. The valley they chose was almost impossible to find. Shielded by ridges and cliffs, it could only be reached through a narrow, dangerous mountain pass that was impassable in winter. But inside, the land was fertile enough for farming, with a stream running through the center, abundant game, and timber for building. It was the perfect hideaway, and the perfect prison. Ezra and Sarah thrived in those early years. Ezra proved to be an adaptable frontiersman, hunting, trapping, and farming to provide food. Sarah became skilled in herbal medicine, food preservation, and other survival arts. In 1839, their first child, Benjamin, was born. His birth marked a turning point. Ezra became fiercely protective, seeing his son as the beginning of something pure, something worth guarding against the outside world at all costs. The children of isolation. 2 more children followed. Martha in 1841 and Rebecca in 1844. With each birth, Ezra withdrew further from society. The children's education was his obsession. Using his collection of books, Ezra taught them philosophy, natural history, and his own version of moral law, ideas rooted not in the Bible or tradition, but in what he claimed were the true principles of nature. Most disturbing of all, Ezra became convinced that ordinary language itself was corrupted. Words, he argued, carried false ideas from society. To raise truly pure children, he believed he needed a new language, one free of lies, one closer to the natural order of existence. He began altering their speech, removing common words and replacing them with strange sounds of his own design. It was the birth of a language that no outsider could understand. The final contact. The last time anyone from the outside world saw Ezra Harwick was in the spring of 1847. He appeared in the logging town of Newcomb to trade, but something about him was different. Jeremiah Foster, the storekeeper who served him, would later give testimony to investigators. Ezra looked gaunt, his eyes hollow, his manner intense. He spoke in odd rhythms, sometimes slipping into words Foster didn't recognize. He purchased strange items, large amounts of salt, surgical tools, and medical books, particularly on anatomy. When Foster asked about his family, Ezra leaned close and whispered words that would haunt him forever. They are pure now, untouched, but the world must never find them. It was the last time Ezra Harwick was seen alive. The descent begins. From 1847 onward, the Harwick family disappeared completely from outside records. For 4 long years, no one knew what was happening in that hidden valley. No one knew that Ezra's ideas about language and purity were growing more extreme. No one knew that he was taking his family down a path that would end in madness, isolation, and horror. And when hunters finally stumbled upon that crude cabin in 1851, they discovered the terrible price of Ezra Harwick's obsession. Bones, symbols, and a boy who no longer spoke like a human being. Right finger, this is only the beginning. In part 2, we'll dive deeper into Ezra Harwick's twisted philosophy, the strange rituals he began teaching his children, and the first signs that the family was drifting into something far darker than isolation. Make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. You might be surprised how many dark secrets your own region hides. That's part 1, The Boy in the Cabin, rewritten into a YouTube horror storytelling style with an engaging hook, suspenseful narration, and simplified language while keeping the historical tone. Do you want me to go ahead and outline all 10 parts first, so you know the full structure, or should I directly start writing part 2, 1000 words next? The Harwick Incident, Part 2, The Cabin in the Woods. Movie camera hook for YouTube. Imagine you're deep in the Adirondack Mountains, hunting deer in the silence of the forest. The air is cool, the pines rise like ancient guardians, and the world feels untouched by man. But then, you see smoke rising from a place that should be empty. You push closer, step by step, and the air changes. It smells wrong, sweet, sickly, like rotting flesh mixed with something human. And carved into the trees are strange symbols, bloody, geometric, and unsettling. By the time you find the cabin, your skin is crawling. The place looks less like a home and more like a shrine to something no one should ever worship. And then you hear it, a child's voice. Inside. But it's not speaking English. It's not speaking any human language at all. This is how the world discovered the Harwick family's terrible secret. The 4 silent years. After Ezra Harwick's last appearance in 1847, the family vanished. For 4 years, no one in the nearby town saw them again. No more trade trips. No friendly waves on logging roads. Nothing. Hunters who once saw smoke rising from their valley now saw only silence. Some guessed they'd moved on, maybe gone west like so many pioneers. Others whispered they had perished in the wilderness, killed by disease, accident, or perhaps one of the few hostile native groups still roaming the deep forests. But the truth was far stranger. Those 4 years of silence were years of transformation, years when Ezra forced his family deeper into isolation, and deeper into his dangerous philosophy. We only know what happened from the journals found later in the cabin, and from the broken words of young Benjamin Harwick. What happened in that valley during those 4 years would forever challenge how we think about human nature itself. The hunting party. The story of discovery begins with 3 men. James Culver, a merchant from North Creek and a part-time constable. Thomas Brennan, his brother-in-law, a tough man who had spent decades in the Adirondacks as a logger and wilderness guide. Dr. William Schuyler, a physician and naturalist, who had joined the expedition mainly to collect medicinal plants. They weren't looking for trouble. They were just following the trail of a large buck Brennan had been tracking, meat that could feed his family through the coming winter. The deer trail wound higher and higher into the mountains, through towering hemlocks and pines so thick that daylight turned to green twilight. It was the kind of wilderness where you could walk for days without seeing another soul. But then Brennan noticed it. Smoke. Thin, gray, rising where no settlement should exist. The smell. At first, the hunters thought they might have stumbled on a trapper's camp. But as they got closer, they felt something was wrong. The air carried a sweet, rotting smell that clung to their throats. Brennan, with his wilderness experience, recognized the scent of carrion instantly. But there was something else mixed in, a human stench, unwashed bodies in close confinement, sweat and sickness. And under it all, something more disturbing, something he couldn't name. Then came the symbols. The marked forest. The trees themselves told the story. Carved into their bark were deliberate markings, strange pictographs of human figures, shapes, and lines forming patterns that seemed to follow an alien logic. Worse, many were filled with dried blood. The men exchanged uneasy looks but pressed on, compelled by a mix of fear and duty. The deeper they went, the more they realized these weren't random scratches. They were warnings. Or perhaps, invitations. The cabin. Finally, through a tangle of brush, the cabin appeared. It was crudely built from logs and clay, roofed with bark and animal hides. But it wasn't just a shelter. The structure seemed to blend into the forest, camouflaged as though it was meant never to be found. Around the cabin's perimeter, more symbols carved into trees formed a kind of circle, a boundary. Animal bones dangled from branches, clacking softly in the breeze like macabre wind chimes. The ground itself showed signs of deliberate arrangement, as though some ritual had been performed over and over. The three men stood in silence, staring. This was no ordinary homestead. Then the door creaked. The voice. Constable Culver stepped forward, calling out in his official voice. "Who's there? Do you need assistance?" What came back was a sound none of them would ever forget. A high-pitched voice, clearly a child's, but the words were alien. Rapid bursts of clicks, guttural growls, and rhythmic patterns flowed like a stream of broken syllables. This was no random babbling. The voice had tone, rhythm, and intent. It was speaking, communicating, but not in any human tongue the men had ever heard. The three stood frozen, hearts pounding. Was it a trick, madness, or something worse? Dr. Schuyler, shaking but determined, pushed the door open and stepped inside. The boy. The cabin's interior was a single dim room. A small fire smoldered in the hearth, filling the space with smoke and shadows. And in the center sat the boy. He looked about 12, though his thin, malnourished frame made him seem younger. His hair was long, matted, and greasy, hanging in clumps around his face. He wore rough clothing sewn from animal hides, marked with the same strange symbols they had seen outside. But it was what surrounded him that froze the hunters' blood. On the floor lay patterns made of bones, animal bones, yes, but also others that looked disturbingly human. The bones were arranged in precise geometric shapes, as though forming some code or ritual circle. Wooden tokens carved with symbols filled the gaps, along with crude tools fashioned from sharpened bone and scavenged bits of metal. The boy sat cross-legged in the middle of it all, chanting in his alien language, staring at them with wild, unblinking eyes. For a moment, none of the men moved. They were intruders in a place that felt less like a home and more like a sanctum. Then, slowly, the boy raised his hand, pointing at them, still speaking in that strange, unnatural tongue. The beginning of horror. Culver, Brennan, and Dr. Schuyler had come looking for a deer. Instead, they had found the beginning of a nightmare. The Harwick family had vanished from the world 4 years earlier. But what they had become in that valley was something no one could have predicted. The boy in the cabin was only the first clue. The journals they would later uncover, and Benjamin's broken words, would reveal a transformation so radical, so terrifying, it would make them question whether isolation could unmake humanity itself. And this was only the beginning. Right finger in part 3, we'll explore what the hunters discovered inside the Harwick cabin, the journals, the symbols, and the shocking evidence of the family's descent into madness. Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter of this chilling true story. That's part 2, The Cabin in the Woods, written in simple, suspenseful language with a strong hook and clear storytelling for YouTube horror narration. Part 3, The Cabin of Symbols. Movie camera hook opening for YouTube audience. Imagine stepping into a cabin deep in the wilderness, only to find every inch of the walls, ceiling, and floor covered in strange, blood-soaked symbols. A starving boy with sharpened teeth speaks in a language no one can understand. And hidden beneath the floorboards, tools, bones, and journals that reveal the horrifying truth of what happened here. This is part 3 of the Harwick mystery, and tonight, the story takes a darker turn. The Cabin of Symbols. When the rescuers first stepped inside the isolated cabin, they felt something was immediately wrong. The boy, gaunt, pale, and hollow-eyed, had been quiet until then. But the moment he saw strangers in the doorway, his voice burst out. His speech was fast, urgent, full of rhythm and strange grammar, though not a single word made sense. He wasn't babbling like a child. His words rose and fell in patterns, as if he was speaking a fully developed language. He pointed around the cabin frantically, his thin arms slicing through the air, desperate to make them understand. And then the rescuers saw what he was pointing at. Every surface of the cabin, walls, ceiling, floor, was carved. Thousands of markings filled the room. Some were simple lines and circles. Others were complex, geometric shapes that seemed to follow some strange alien order. From every angle, the carvings made the space feel wrong, like the cabin was bending and warping under their gaze. Some of the designs looked like drawings of people, hunting, working, even sitting around fires. But the details twisted these everyday scenes into something darker. Figures bowing, cutting, burning, and performing rituals that felt more monstrous than human. Worse still, many of the carvings weren't just scratches in the wood. They had been filled in with a thick black substance. Later, they would learn it was a mixture of human blood, charcoal, and animal fat. In the glow of the fire, the markings seemed alive, pulsing, shifting, breathing with malevolent intelligence. Dr. Schuyler, the physician, knelt down beside the boy. He kept his voice soft, his movements calm. The child's condition was alarming, skin stretched tight over bones, scars on his arms and chest, his body ravaged by hunger and exposure. His teeth had been filed to sharp points, better suited for tearing flesh than chewing bread. But what disturbed Schuyler most was the boy's composure. He wasn't crying, he wasn't begging for help. He looked at them with the calmness of someone who belonged here. Meanwhile, Culver and Brennan searched the rest of the small cabin. That's when they uncovered something worse than the carvings. Beneath a pile of furs in the corner, they found a stack of journals. The handwriting was elegant, educated. The early entries described ordinary frontier life, hunting, farming, raising children. But as the pages turned, the words grew darker. The writer, Ezra Harwick, described purification experiments and the refinement of human instincts. His ideas shifted from survival to obsession, from philosophy to madness. Loose floorboards revealed more horrors, crude surgical instruments stained with old blood. Collections of teeth and finger bones, arranged in neat, decorative patterns. Drawings of human anatomy, detailed and obsessive, annotated in multiple languages, some real, some incomprehensible, matching the symbols carved into the walls. The rescuers realized this wasn't just a tragedy. It was something far more sinister. Their first priority was to get the boy, Benjamin, out alive. But when they tried, things didn't go as planned. Benjamin resisted, not violently, but with terror. His voice rose in panicked streams of his strange language. His bony hands clutched their coats, and he kept pointing back at the cabin as though leaving it meant breaking some sacred law. Finally, Schuyler coaxed him outside. But the moment Benjamin crossed the threshold, he grew frantic, pointing back, shouting in his strange tongue, his voice carrying tones of warning and fear. To him, leaving was not salvation. It was violation. The trip back to North Creek took 2 days. Benjamin was too weak to travel quickly. Along the way, Schuyler made careful notes. The boy wasn't simply repeating nonsense. His speech followed strict grammar. He combined words with gestures, layering meaning. He had a full, functioning language, but one no outsider could understand. And Benjamin wasn't just unusual in speech. His survival knowledge shocked them. He knew every plant, every track, every sound of the forest. He knew how to butcher animals with precision, which organs were most nourishing, and how to cook meat barely enough to make it edible. Eating, for him, wasn't simple hunger, it was ritual. By the time they reached North Creek, the rescuers understood one thing clearly: Benjamin had not been raised like any normal child. The Reverend Samuel Houghton and his wife Elizabeth took the boy in. Their large two-story house was warm and welcoming, filled with other children who had lost their families to the dangers of frontier life. But Benjamin was different. He didn't understand privacy, or ownership, or even kindness. He obeyed rules of dominance and submission, not equality or compassion. His strange words and frightening gestures unsettled the other children. Mrs. Houghton, patient though she was, could see this was no ordinary case of trauma. Dr. Schuyler wrote to scholars in Albany and New York. The replies came from Professor Marcus Delacroix of Columbia College, a linguist who had studied isolated communities across Europe and America. When Delacroix arrived in North Creek that October, he was stunned. Benjamin's speech wasn't a mix of English and frontier dialects. It wasn't corrupted language, it was an invention. Benjamin spoke a fully artificial language, carefully built, with rules and patterns. And it wasn't just for communication. It shaped thought itself. This language had words for decomposition, death, ritual, and submission. It had detailed vocabulary for hunger, for cutting, for survival in the wild. But it lacked words for freedom. It had no way to express justice, compassion, or resistance. The language itself had been designed to erase morality. As Delacroix worked with Benjamin, he uncovered a worldview that was both terrifying and systematic. To Benjamin, relationships were built only on power, master and servant, predator and prey. To him, this wasn't cruel. It was natural. Meanwhile, the townsfolk studied Ezra Harwick's journals. The entries revealed a chilling transformation. Ezra began as a family man, but isolation drove him to obsession. He rejected human society as artificial, claiming morality was a prison. He sought to strip away civilized lies, and create a purer humanity. He invented the language to control his family's thoughts. He used hunger, rituals, and fear to reshape them. By 1848, 3 years into isolation, his writings described revelations received during long winter nights. Ezra believed he had discovered the truth, that human instincts must be freed through suffering, ritual, and blood. And so, he turned his family into his experiment. Right finger end of part 3 teaser for YouTube. What Ezra Harwick began in that cabin was more than madness, it was transformation. A family reshaped into something beyond human. And as Benjamin struggled to live in North Creek, darker secrets from the journals would reveal just how far Ezra's experiments went. In part 4, the story grows even more horrifying. Part 4: The Journals of Madness. Movie camera hook opening for YouTube audience. What happens when a father isolates his family from the world, and decides to rebuild them in his own image? In the wilderness of 1851, the Harwick journals reveal a descent so dark, it turned a family home into a laboratory of horror. Tonight, in part 4, we uncover the writings of Ezra Harwick, and the twisted philosophy that gave birth to a new language of madness. The Journals of Madness. In the Reverend's study at North Creek, the recovered journals lay on the table. Candlelight flickered over their leather covers, their pages yellowed and brittle from years of use. Around the table sat Drive, Schuyler, Reverend Houghton, Professor Delacroix, and several respected townsfolk. Each man carried a look of dread, for they already knew these journals did not tell a normal story of frontier hardship. They told the story of how Ezra Harwick had destroyed his own family. The earliest entries were harmless enough. Ezra described clearing land, teaching his children to read, planting corn, and hunting deer. He wrote about the struggles of harsh winters and the pride of seeing his children grow strong. He seemed a devoted father, a man of learning who had brought his family to the frontier for freedom and opportunity. But by the third winter, the tone began to shift. Ezra complained about neighbors, about the pollution of society, and the falsehood of civilized law. He wrote of a growing conviction that morality itself was a lie, a chain that kept humanity weak. By the spring of 1848, Ezra claimed to have received visions. He called them revelations, whispered in the dead of night, when the snow howled against the cabin walls. These revelations convinced him that man was meant to live by instinct alone, that all laws, governments, and religions were deceptions designed to cripple the human spirit. He began to write of purification. First came diet. Ezra forced his family to eat only meat, often raw or barely cooked, explaining that fire weakened the essence of flesh. Bread and vegetables were forbidden. The children's teeth, he claimed, must be sharpened to their natural form. And so he filed them down into points. Next came rituals. Ezra described sessions of silence lasting days, where the family was forbidden to speak, only to break the silence with chants of strange words, words from the language he was creating. He believed English, with its talk of mercy, kindness, and freedom, was a cage. He wanted a language that would free them from these illusions. The journals contained his notes on this new tongue. He designed it to shape thought itself. Words for hunger, for blood, for obedience, hundreds of them. But no words for fairness, love, or justice. He was building not just a language but a prison of the mind. And the family had no choice but to live inside it. As the journals progressed, they documented punishments for disobedience. Children were locked in dark corners for days. They were starved until they obeyed. His wife, Margaret, once begged him to stop, but Ezra wrote with cold detachment how he broke her resistance through purification trials. The most horrifying passages described lessons of the body. Ezra performed crude medical procedures, believing he could unlock hidden strength. The journals detailed incisions, removal of teeth, even deliberate scarring. He wrote of collecting bones and teeth as sacred relics of the transformation. By 1850, Ezra no longer saw his family as individuals. He referred to them as subjects. His entries read more like the notebooks of a scientist or a butcher. He wrote of progress, of successes and failures, of which child showed promise, and which was too corrupted by the old ways. The townsmen around the reverend's table felt sick as they read. Elizabeth Houghton excused herself in tears. But Delacroix urged them to keep going. He believed the journals were the only way to understand what Benjamin had become. Then came the last entries. Ezra spoke of the language as complete, a new tongue for the new man. He boasted that his children now thought only in the terms he had given them. They could no longer even imagine disobedience. To Ezra, this was victory. But his writings grew stranger still. He claimed the symbols carved into the cabin walls were keys, a system of thought etched into the very structure of their home. The mixture of blood and ash, he wrote, bound the symbols to the essence of life. He spoke of communion with the beyond, of voices answering his chants, of shadows moving where no light fell. By the time the final pages were written, Ezra no longer sounded like a man. He sounded like a prophet of something alien and unspeakable. And then, the entries stopped. The journals never explained what happened to the rest of the family. No graves were found, no bodies. Only Benjamin remained, alive but transformed. In North Creek, Professor Delacroix worked day and night with Benjamin, trying to translate more of the strange language. What he uncovered chilled him. The boy had no words for mother or father. Family, as we understand it, did not exist in his tongue. The only relationships were those of power, leader and follower, master and subject. When Delacroix tried to teach him simple English words like love or friend, Benjamin tilted his head in confusion, as if these concepts were nonsense. But when asked to describe decay, flesh, or obedience, he grew animated, speaking rapidly, gesturing with precision. The Reverend tried reading scripture to him, but Benjamin only frowned, as though the very ideas were impossible. His language had erased the foundation of morality itself. As word spread through North Creek, fear began to take hold. Parents warned their children not to go near the Reverend's house. Whispers spread that Benjamin was cursed, that he had brought something unnatural with him. And some believed the journals should never have been read at all. Because if Ezra's words were true, he had not just destroyed his family, he had opened a door to something that should never have been let in. Right finger end of Part 4 teaser for YouTube. In Part 5, the people of North Creek must decide, is Benjamin a victim to be saved, or a threat to be feared? And as scholars dig deeper into Ezra Harwick's strange symbols, they begin to suspect the carvings weren't just madness, but a message. Part 5 Whispers in North Creek. Movie camera hook opening for YouTube audience. What happens when a child raised in madness is brought back into society? In 1851, the small frontier town of North Creek thought they had rescued young Benjamin Harwick from the wilderness. But the more they tried to civilize him, the more they realized the wilderness had followed him back. This is Part 5, Whispers in North Creek. Whispers in North Creek. The Reverend Samuel Houghton's home had always been a place of refuge. Travelers passing through the Adirondacks found food and shelter there, orphans were taken in, and the Reverend's wife Elizabeth offered gentle care to anyone in need. But with Benjamin Harwick living under their roof, the house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a place under siege. At first, the townsfolk tried to be understanding. The boy had been through horrors few could imagine. He needed patience, guidance, and time. But patience began to wear thin when strange things started happening. Neighbors reported hearing unsettling sounds at night, strange chants and guttural cries drifting from the Reverend's home. The Reverend swore it was only Benjamin talking in his strange language, but people whispered it sounded more like rituals, as though the boy were calling to something that did not belong in this world. Children in town began to mimic his gestures and noises, frightening their parents. One little girl claimed Benjamin taught her a game that involved carving marks into a tree and chanting over them. When her father discovered the carvings, they matched the exact symbols found in the Harwick cabin. Fear spread quickly. The Reverend begged his congregation for compassion. This child is a victim, he preached. He knows not what he does. We must teach him. But whispers in the tavern and around hearth fires told another story. Some believed Benjamin carried a curse. Others feared Ezra Harwick's madness was contagious, passed down through his son's words. And Benjamin himself did little to calm their fears. Despite Elizabeth's kindness, he resisted every attempt to integrate him into normal life. He refused to wear proper clothing, tearing at shirts until they hung in tatters. He preferred to eat his meat barely cooked, gnawing on bones with sharpened teeth while the other children stared in horror. Worse still were his outbursts. When frustrated or misunderstood, Benjamin would scream in his strange language, clawing at the walls or pounding his fists on the floor. His fits followed patterns, as if he wasn't simply lashing out, but performing some ritualistic sequence of movements and sounds. Dr. Schuyler observed closely, filling notebooks with details. He noted that Benjamin's speech wasn't random but highly structured. This is not madness, he told the Reverend. It is design. Every sound, every gesture has meaning. We are dealing with a child who thinks within an entirely different framework of reality. Professor Marcus Delacroix agreed. He spent hours with Benjamin, slowly building a crude dictionary of words and phrases. What he found disturbed him deeply. Benjamin's vocabulary had no word for love, but dozens for dominate, obey, and consume. There were no terms for fairness or kindness, but precise words for different stages of rot and decay. The language itself was shaping how the boy understood the world. It is as if Ezra Harwick rewired his children's very minds, Delacroix said gravely. This language was designed not only to communicate, but to limit thought. To make compassion impossible, Elizabeth tried a different approach. She sang hymns to Benjamin at night, hoping music would soothe him. For a time, it seemed to calm him. He would sit quietly, eyes closed, listening. But one evening, as she finished a gentle hymn, Benjamin began chanting back in his own tongue, matching her melody but twisting the words into guttural sounds. The effect was chilling. The sweet song of worship had become something darker, a hymn to an unknown force. Elizabeth broke down in tears. The turning point came late one November night. A barn at the edge of town caught fire. Neighbors rushed to put it out, forming a bucket line from the creek. When the flames were finally beaten back, the owner swore he had seen a figure near the barn before the fire started, a boy with wild hair, carving something into the wood. The next morning, when the smoke cleared, they found the truth. Burned into the barn's blackened beams were strange symbols, identical to those in the Harwick journals. The townspeople erupted in anger. A mob gathered outside the Reverend's home, demanding Benjamin be cast out. "He'll bring ruin on all of us," one man shouted. Another declared, "That boy ain't natural. He's a danger." The Reverend stood on his porch, hands raised, pleading for calm. "He is only a child," he cried. "Would you condemn an orphan for the sins of his father?" But the crowd was not convinced. Stones were thrown, windows shattered. Inside, Elizabeth clutched Benjamin to her chest, though the boy stared coldly at the mob, muttering in his strange tongue. His face held no fear, only a chilling calm, as if he knew something the rest of them did not. Dr. Schuyler and Professor Delacroix intervened, urging the mob to disperse. They warned that harming the boy would solve nothing. Reluctantly, the townsfolk pulled back, but the damage was done. From that night on, Benjamin was a pariah. Delacroix pressed harder in his studies, convinced the language held the key. Late at night, by lamplight, he pored over Ezra's journals, tracing symbols, cross-referencing words. The deeper he went, the more unsettled he became. He began to dream of the symbols, dreams where the lines and curves seemed to move like living things, twisting into shapes that whispered to him in the dark. Meanwhile, Benjamin grew restless. He scratched symbols into the Reverend's floors, into the bark of trees, even into his own skin. He spoke more urgently in his strange tongue, as though preparing for something. One evening, Delacroix attempted to translate a phrase Benjamin repeated often. After weeks of study, he believed he had it. The phrase, chanted over and over, meant, "The door must open." When he told the Reverend, a heavy silence fell over the room. Elizabeth crossed herself. Dr. Schuyler muttered, "What door? And to where?" No one had the answer. But in the weeks to come, North Creek would discover the terrible truth. Right finger end of Part 5 teaser for YouTube. In Part 6, winter closes in on North Creek. Benjamin's influence begins to spread in ways no one can explain. And when strange deaths occur in the forest, the townsfolk wonder if Ezra Harwick's work didn't end in that cabin, but is only beginning. Would you like me to continue and draft Part 6 right now, so your series flows smoothly without pause? Part 6 Winter of Shadows. Movie camera hook opening for YouTube audience. Winter in the Adirondacks is harsh. Snow buries homes, silence fills the valleys, and survival becomes a daily battle. But in the winter of 1851, the town of North Creek faced more than cold and hunger. They faced something darker, something that whispered in the shadows, carried on the voice of a boy who should never have been found. This is Part 6, Winter of Shadows. Winter of Shadows. Snow fell heavy on the Adirondacks that year, thick enough to trap families inside their cabins for weeks at a time. The forest grew silent, muffled beneath a white shroud, but within the Reverend's house, silence was a rare commodity. Benjamin Harwick muttered constantly. Day and night, his strange language poured out of him in whispers, chants, and guttural cries. Sometimes he spoke as if in conversation with an unseen presence. Other times his words rose into a fevered rhythm, as though he were reciting prayers. Elizabeth Houghton would pause in her work and shudder. She swore the boy's tone was not that of a child but of a priest delivering sacred rites, except these rites belonged to no church on earth. The Reverend tried to keep order, but his patience frayed. He preached compassion, but even he could not ignore the effect Benjamin had on the household. Food spoiled faster than it should. Lamps smoked and sputtered. Elizabeth claimed she woke one night to see Benjamin standing at the foot of her bed, eyes open but unblinking, whispering words she could not understand. And then came the deaths. It began with trappers found in the woods, their bodies half buried in snow. Wolves, the locals thought, until the Reverend was called to see for himself. Their wounds were not the tearing marks of animals but precise cuts, almost surgical. Bones were arranged beside the corpses in patterns eerily similar to the symbols carved in the Harwick cabin. Dr. Schuyler examined the bodies, pale and shaken. "This is no beast," he whispered. "This is ritual." The town grew restless. Many blamed Benjamin, convinced the boy had brought something evil with him. "He's calling to it," one man insisted. "That language of his, he's summoning whatever killed those men." Professor Delacroix tried to reason with them. "The boy is not the murderer," he argued. "But he may know what is happening. His language, his symbols, they describe things beyond our understanding. We must learn from him before we condemn him." But Delacroix himself was not free from doubt. The deeper he studied Ezra Harwick's journals, the more disturbed he became. Entries from 1849 spoke of breaking the boundaries of flesh, and opening the door to the truest form of existence. Ezra described rituals performed on long winter nights, rituals involving blood, bone, and the reshaping of language itself. Language, Ezra claimed, was the lock that bound humanity to false morality. By creating a new language, free from the corruption of civilization, he could unlock a purer way of being. He wrote of teaching this language to his children so they could think thoughts no one else could imagine. And over, he repeated a single phrase: "The door must open." Delacroix began to dream again. Dreams of snow-covered forests where strange figures moved between the trees, whispering in Benjamin's voice. Dreams where symbols writhed like living things, rearranging themselves into patterns that pulsed with meaning he almost, but not quite, understood. He woke drenched in sweat, his ears ringing with the echo of words he could not stop hearing. Meanwhile, Benjamin's influence spread. Children in North Creek began repeating his gestures and noises, playing secret games in the woods. When their parents scolded them, the children grew angry, their little voices repeating phrases in Benjamin's tongue. Elizabeth caught her youngest helper carving a symbol into the floorboards of the church with a nail. When she demanded to know who taught her, the girl simply smiled and said, "Benjamin." The Reverend tried to stop it, banning Benjamin from services, but his sermons faltered. More and more, he found himself distracted by whispers, low voices that seemed to come from nowhere, repeating Benjamin's strange words at the edge of hearing. Fear turned to paranoia. A hunting party found another body in the snow, this one a farmer from a nearby settlement. His chest had been cut open, ribs bent outward, heart missing. Around him, symbols had been stamped into the snow with bare feet. The tracks led back toward North Creek. That night, a group of men gathered at the tavern, demanding action. "The boy is cursed," they said. "If we don't get rid of him, we'll all be next." The Reverend pleaded again for mercy, but his words held less power now. Even Elizabeth, who had once defended Benjamin fiercely, admitted in private that the boy terrified her. "He looks at me," she whispered, "as if I'm not a person at all, but a thing to be measured, a tool for some purpose I can't imagine." Professor Delacroix grew desperate. He believed Benjamin's language held the answer, not just to the murders, but to Ezra's entire experiment. Night after night, he sat with the boy, coaxing out words and phrases, scribbling notes by candlelight. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. Benjamin's language described a world layered atop the ordinary one, a hidden reality where death was not an end but a passage. Where flesh was raw material, and transformation was the highest form of existence. The door Ezra spoke of was not metaphorical. It was a gateway, something he believed could be opened with blood, ritual, and the right words. Delacroix realized, with dawning horror, that Benjamin wasn't just speaking nonsense. He was reciting instructions, and the killings in the woods, the arranged bones, the symbols in blood, they were not random acts of violence. They were attempts to complete Ezra's work. But who was carrying them out? Was it Benjamin himself, sneaking out into the snow at night? Or had someone else in town already fallen under his influence, remade by the language and the whispers? The answer came one night in late January. Elizabeth woke to find Benjamin gone from his bed. She woke the Reverend, and together they followed his footprints out into the snow. The tracks led them into the forest, deeper and deeper until the trees pressed close. And there, in a small clearing, they saw him. Benjamin stood before a crude altar of stones, his thin body illuminated by the pale moon. Around him, carved into the snow, was a circle of symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. He chanted in his strange tongue, voice rising and falling like a song. But he was not alone. Kneeling in the snow around him were 5 children from the town, their faces blank, their small voices joining his chant. Elizabeth gasped. The Reverend tried to rush forward, but Benjamin's head snapped up. His eyes glowed in the moonlight, cold and unblinking. And in a voice clear and sharp, he spoke the words Delacroix had feared most. "The door is opening. Right finger end of Part 6 teaser for YouTube. In Part 7, the Reverend must confront the unthinkable truth, that the darkness infecting Benjamin is spreading through the children of North Creek. And when the first adult begins speaking in the Harwick language, the town realizes the infection is no longer confined to one boy. Part 7 The Children's Choir. Movie camera hook opening for YouTube audience. In the frozen town of North Creek, whispers spread like frost. It was no longer just one boy speaking in a language no one should understand. The children of the town had joined him. But when adults began repeating the same cursed words in their sleep, the town realized the infection was spreading faster than anyone could stop. This is Part 7, The Children's Choir. The Children's Choir. The clearing in the woods was silent after Benjamin's chant ended, but silence did not bring comfort. The Reverend and Elizabeth watched in horror as the children of North Creek rose to their feet, eyes dull, faces pale, as if their very souls had been hollowed out. Benjamin stepped forward, his breath fogging in the icy air. He was barefoot, but the snow did not seem to touch him. His lips curled into something that was almost a smile. Then, without warning, the children turned and walked back toward town, their movements synchronized, as though led by an invisible hand. The Reverend wanted to run after them, but Benjamin lifted his hand. The Reverend froze, not because he chose to, but because his body would not obey him. His limbs felt locked in place, his chest tight. Elizabeth pulled at his sleeve, sobbing, but she too could not move. Benjamin lowered his hand, and suddenly the spell was broken. The boys slipped back into the trees, vanishing like smoke. The Reverend and Elizabeth stumbled back to town, shaken, their words tumbling over each other in frantic bursts. But when they tried to warn the townsfolk, no one believed them. "Children don't chant in strange tongues," scoffed one father. "They mimic, they play." Yet when he returned home, he found his daughter sitting in the corner, humming in Benjamin's language, her tiny fingers drawing symbols on the wall. By the end of the week, more than a dozen families reported the same thing. Children waking in the night, speaking words they had never learned, carving symbols with nails or knives, gathering in small groups to whisper together. They called it the Children's Choir. Professor Delacroix kept his notes feverishly, though his hands trembled so much he could barely write. He no longer dreamed, he heard. Even awake, words pressed at his skull, phrases that seemed to claw their way into his thoughts. Sometimes he found himself whispering them under his breath before he even realized it. One night, Elizabeth found him in the church cellar, carving one of the Harwick symbols into the stone with a hammer and chisel. When she cried out, Delacroix looked at her with glassy eyes and whispered, "It makes sense now, the words fit, the door must open." He collapsed a moment later, weeping, horrified at what he had done. The Reverend tried to hold the town together with prayer, but his sermons faltered. In the middle of reading scripture, he would suddenly find his tongue twisting into Benjamin's language. The congregation sat frozen as he spoke words no Bible contained. When he realized what he was saying, he slammed the book shut, trembling. And then came the first adult to fall. Her name was Margaret Cole, a widow who lived alone. She was found wandering in the woods, barefoot in the snow, her mouth torn bloody from repeating chants until her lips split. When they brought her back to town, she screamed in Benjamin's language until her voice cracked. "Doctor!" Schuyler tried to restrain her, but she lashed out with unnatural strength, nearly breaking his wrist. "She's not herself," he gasped. "It's as if something else is inside her." The town grew desperate. Some called for Benjamin to be killed. Others demanded he be cast out into the forest. But the Reverend resisted, torn between fear and compassion. "He is still a child," he said. "If we destroy him, we may only seal our own damnation." Elizabeth, though, had no such doubts. "That boy is not a child anymore," she whispered to Delacroix. "He's the seed of something Ezra planted. If we don't end it now, we will all be consumed." Delacroix wavered. His rational mind told him Elizabeth was right. But another part of him, a part that had begun to grow since the night in the woods, longed to hear more. He dreamed of understanding the language completely, of stepping through the door Ezra described. And Benjamin knew it. He began visiting Delacroix in secret, appearing at his window late at night, his pale face pressed to the glass. The professor should have been terrified, but instead, he opened the window. The boy whispered words into Delacroix's ear, and the professor wrote them down with trembling hands. Each phrase made less sense in English, but more sense in the strange grammar of the Harwick tongue. It was a key, fitting into the lock of his mind. By February, the town was falling apart. Parents locked their children inside, terrified of finding them gone in the night. Yet no lock could hold them. Every few days, another child disappeared, only to return at dawn with frostbitten feet and blood under their fingernails. Elizabeth followed one group once, careful to stay hidden. She saw them gather at the frozen river, their small bodies shivering but their voices strong as they chanted together. Benjamin stood in the center, leading them like a conductor before a choir. And on the ice, carved with knives, were more symbols, so large they could be seen from the hills above the town. Symbols that seemed to pulse when the moonlight touched them. The Reverend confronted Benjamin at last. He dragged the boy into the church, slamming the doors shut. "You will stop this," he cried. "In the name of God, you will end these chants and free these children." Benjamin only tilted his head. "You cannot stop the door," he said in perfect English for the first time. His voice was not a child's voice. It was deeper, older, layered with echoes. Elizabeth gasped. The Reverend staggered back. Benjamin smiled, a cold curve of lips. "The choir is only the beginning. Soon the whole town will sing. And when they do, the door will open wide." The candles in the church flickered violently, their flames bending toward Benjamin as though drawn to him. Elizabeth lunged forward with a crucifix, pressing it to the boy's chest. For the first time, he screamed, not in fear, but in rage. His skin burned where the metal touched, smoke curling upward. He shoved her back with a strength no child should have. The Reverend caught her before she hit the floor, but by the time they looked up, Benjamin was gone. The church door swung open on its own, snow blowing in as though the night itself had entered. Outside, faintly, they heard it, the sound of children singing. Dash dash dash. Right finger end of Part 7 teaser for YouTube. In Part 8, the infection spreads beyond the children. Adults across North Creek begin to chant in their sleep, carving symbols into their homes, their barns, even their own flesh. And when the river ice cracks open, the town realizes something beneath the surface has been waiting to answer Benjamin's call. Part 8. The river cracks open. Movie camera hook opening for YouTube audience. The children's choir was only the beginning. Soon, the parents themselves began to speak in the cursed tongue, murmuring words they had never learned, carving symbols into their own flesh. And when the frozen river split apart in the dead of night, something that had been waiting beneath the ice finally stirred. This is Part 8. The river cracks open. Dash dash dash. The river cracks open. The winter of 1852 tightened its grip on North Creek like a vice. Snow piled against houses, barns groaned under its weight, and the river lay frozen in a sheet of white that stretched like glass across the valley. But within that frozen stillness, the infection was spreading. It began with whispers in the night. At first, it was only children muttering in their sleep. Now, grown men and women sat up in bed, mouths open, chanting in Benjamin's language with blank eyes. Some clawed at their skin, gouging strange marks into their arms and legs with fingernails sharpened to the quick. One farmer, Samuel Grant, was found wandering his barn with a knife, carving Harwick symbols into the wooden beams. His wife screamed as he turned the blade toward his own chest, etching circles and triangles into his flesh. When neighbors tried to restrain him, Samuel fought like a beast until he collapsed from blood loss. The Reverend Houghton attempted to drive out the sickness with prayer, but each sermon ended the same way, half the congregation whispering in unison, their voices overlapping in eerie harmony. He could not stop them, he could only watch as the infection spread like fire. Elizabeth, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights, begged him to act. "It's not a disease," she said. "It's a possession. Benjamin carries it like a torch, and every time he speaks, another soul is set aflame." Professor Delacroix, however, was no longer certain he wanted to stop it. His notebooks were now filled cover to cover with Harwick script, entire passages written without conscious thought. Sometimes, when he tried to read them back, the words made his head ache, but at other times, they made a terrible kind of sense. "The language doesn't just describe reality," he told the Reverend one night. "It reshapes it. Every word spoken is a hammer strike against the world as we know it." Ezra Harwick wasn't mad, he was building something. And Benjamin is the proof. The Reverend slammed his fist on the table. "Building what? Madness. Murder. We are losing our people. This is the work of the devil, Delacroix, not philosophy." But the professor only stared into the candlelight, whispering a phrase under his breath. The night of the breaking. On the night of February 23rd, the sound came like thunder. Families awoke to a crack splitting the frozen river wide open. The ground trembled as ice shattered, great sheets lifting and falling with a roar like mountains breaking. Men rushed from their homes with lanterns, their boots sinking into snow, their breath steaming in the frigid air. And there, on the broken riverbank, they saw a gathering. Children stood in a wide circle, their small hands clasped together. In the center stood Benjamin, his face lit by the lanterns, his eyes reflecting the firelight in unnatural gleams. Around him, adults, mothers, fathers, neighbors, knelt in the snow, carving symbols into the ice with knives, their blood dripping to stain the frozen surface. As the lantern light spread, the watchers saw it clearly, a massive design carved across the ice, visible only now that cracks in the river revealed it. Circles within circles, lines intersecting with inhuman precision, symbols that twisted and curved in ways the eye could barely follow. It pulsed, not from lantern light, from beneath. The ice throbbed like skin over a beating heart. Elizabeth clutched the Reverend's arm. "It's alive," she whispered. "The river is alive." Benjamin raised his arms, and every voice, child and adult, rose in perfect unison. The chant rolled like waves, echoing against the trees, carrying into the night sky. The words were not human, but they carried a weight, a force, that pressed against the ears like thunder. Then the ice split. A jagged crack tore down the center of the river, water surging upward in a column that froze midair before crashing down. From the darkness below, a shape moved. Not fully seen, not fully formed, but vast, so vast the mind recoiled from it. Some swore they saw a hand with too many fingers pressing against the ice. Others claimed they saw only shadows, twisting and shifting like smoke. But all agreed on one thing. Whatever it was answering Benjamin's call. The townsfolk panicked. Some fled. Others fell to their knees, joining the chant without meaning to, their mouths moving against their will. The Reverend forced his way forward, shouting scripture over the roar of voices, but his words were swallowed. The chant grew louder, faster, as though urging the thing beneath the river to rise. Elizabeth ran to the children, grabbing them by the shoulders, shaking them, screaming their names. But their eyes were blank, their bodies stiff. They were not children anymore, they were instruments. At last, she fell before Benjamin, clutching his thin arm. "Please," she begged, "please, stop this. You're only a boy. You don't know what you're doing." Benjamin looked down at her, and for a moment, just a flicker, she saw something human in his face. A frightened child, gaunt and hungry, caught in forces beyond his control. But then the other look returned, the cold, ancient look. He whispered something in Harwick's tongue. Elizabeth didn't understand the words, but the meaning pressed into her mind like claws. "The door is almost open." The ice groaned again, and the river boiled. The turning point. It was Professor Delacroix who broke the spell, though not in the way anyone expected. Driven half mad by his studies, he rushed forward, notebook in hand, shouting in the same cursed language. But his chant was different. His words clashed with Benjamin's, like two melodies fighting for dominance. Benjamin's eyes snapped to him in fury. The choir faltered. The children hesitated. Even the thing beneath the ice seemed to pause, waiting. Delacroix's face twisted with agony as blood poured from his nose and ears, but he shouted louder, forcing the words out, his voice tearing itself raw. The symbols carved into the ice began to blur, lines melting, curves unraveling. Benjamin screamed, not a child's scream, but a sound that rattled the bones of every listener. The lanterns blew out in a single gust, plunging the riverbank into darkness. And then, silence. When the light returned, the great shadow beneath the ice had vanished. The chanting had stopped. The children collapsed, unconscious, into the snow. The adults wept, staring at their bloody hands in horror. But Benjamin was gone. Only his footprints remained, leading into the woods, vanishing into the blackness of the pines. Right finger end of Part 8 teaser for YouTube. In Part 9, The Town. Reels from the failed summoning. But Benjamin has not disappeared. In the woods, he gathers those still loyal to him, and Ezra Harwick's journals begin to reveal the true nature of the door he seeks to open. The real horror is yet to come. Part 9 The Gathering in the Pines. Movie camera hook opening for YouTube audience. They thought it was over when the river froze shut again. They thought Benjamin was gone. But the boy did not vanish. He simply moved into the forest, where the pines stood older than memory. And there, among the snow and shadows, he began to gather followers. This is Part 9, The Gathering in the Pines. The Gathering in the Pines. North Creek never fully recovered from that night on the river. The people who had carved their own flesh tried to go on with life, but every scar was a reminder. Children who had chanted in unison now woke screaming in the dark, speaking words their parents could not understand. Livestock died without reason, crops spoiled in storage, and always, in the silence of the snow, someone would hear it, the echo of Benjamin's strange tongue, drifting through the trees. The search parties combed the woods for days, but no trace of the boy was found. Professor Delacroix insisted he had gone deeper into the wilderness, perhaps to complete what had been interrupted. Reverend Houghton wanted to believe the opposite, that Benjamin had perished in the cold. But in their hearts, none of them believed he was truly gone. Because signs began to appear. Hunters found animal carcasses arranged in geometric patterns, rib cages pried open and filled with pine needles. Children vanished from outlying farms, their footprints leading into the forest, never to return. And the symbols, always the symbols, appearing on tree trunks, carved into barn doors, scratched into frost on window glass. The people began to whisper a new name, The Gathering in the Pines. The first return. In early March, two trappers stumbled back into North Creek, their faces pale as death. They claimed they had found a camp deep in the forest, hidden in a hollow where ancient pines grew so close their branches wove into a roof. There, they saw Benjamin. But he was no longer just a boy. He sat like a chieftain, cross-legged in the snow, surrounded by children, at least a dozen of them, some from North Creek, others unknown. Around them stood adults too, gaunt and glass-eyed, whispering his language under their breath. The trappers said Benjamin's skin was marked with fresh carvings, new scars glowing red against his pale flesh. His teeth flashed sharp as he smiled, and when he raised his hands, every follower bowed as one. Most horrifying of all, the followers had begun carving the same marks into themselves. The trappers did not linger. They fled through the forest, chased by the sound of chanting that grew louder the farther they ran. When their story spread, panic gripped the town. Reverend Houghton demanded that men take up arms and march into the woods. But Delacroix, pale and trembling, warned against it. If you go to him now, you will not fight him, you will join him. His language is a weapon. His words do not persuade, they enslave. But even as he spoke, Delacroix's fingers twitched, tracing invisible symbols on the table. Elizabeth Houghton saw it, and fear filled her heart. The professor was already half claimed. The second journals. Meanwhile, more of Ezra Harwick's journals were being decoded. Pages hidden in false bindings revealed Ezra's final theories, the ones too dangerous for his earlier self to admit. He spoke of a door. Not a wooden door, not a gate of iron, but a threshold between realities. Human language, he believed, was a cage that kept people from seeing the world as it truly was. To break the cage, a new language was needed, one that erased morality, erased individuality, erased the barriers between flesh and spirit. Ezra believed that when spoken in unison, this language could tear the veil between worlds. And beyond that veil, something waited. Something older than humanity, older than the mountains themselves. Ezra called it the root of existence. Others, later, would call it by simpler names: the hunger, the black mouth, the shadow below. The professor trembled as he read these passages aloud, but he could not stop. Ezra was building the door, he whispered. Benjamin is the key. The Pine Hollow. By mid-March, reports of the Pine Hollow multiplied. Farmers swore they heard drums at night, though no one owned drums in North Creek. Women swore they saw children standing at the forest's edge, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight, before vanishing between the trees. At last, the Reverend and a small band of men rode out, determined to destroy the camp. They carried rifles and torches, muttering prayers under their breath. They returned 2 days later, without their rifles, without their torches. And they returned changed. Their clothes were ragged, their bodies cut with fresh scars. Their eyes held no light of recognition. They spoke only in Benjamin's tongue. The Reverend was among them. Elizabeth collapsed when she saw him, her strong husband now reduced to a hollow vessel. He reached for her, but his mouth opened only to chant the cursed words, his voice blending with the others in a dreadful harmony. That night, they left North Creek and walked into the woods, never to be seen again. The town collapses. Panic turned to despair. Families packed wagons in the snow, trying to flee before their children were claimed. Some vanished on the road. Others reached nearby settlements, bringing with them stories that spread like wildfire. Of a boy prophet in the woods. Of chants that hollowed out men's souls. Of a new religion being born in blood and pine needles. North Creek emptied in a matter of weeks. Only a handful of families remained, too poor or too stubborn to leave. Elizabeth stayed, though she lived like a ghost, clutching her Bible with white knuckles, waiting for the day her husband might return, or the day Benjamin would come for her. And always, the river whispered. When the thaw began, the cracks in the ice glowed faintly at night, as though embers burned beneath the water. Delacroix's last words. The professor was the last scholar left in town. Gaunt, sleepless, his notebooks filled with pages of symbols, he confessed one final truth to Elizabeth before vanishing himself. The language is not Ezra's invention. It is discovery. He did not create it, he remembered it. Words buried in the earth, older than mankind, older than the trees. Benjamin was born to speak it. That is why it flows so easily from him. He does not invent, he recalls. Elizabeth wept. And what happens when the remembering is complete? Delacroix's answer chilled her blood. Then the door opens. The next morning, his bed was empty. His notebooks were gone. And in the forest, a new chant rose, louder than ever before. Right finger end of Part 9 teaser for YouTube. In Part 10, the final horror begins. As the thaw reaches its height, Benjamin's gathering swells into a full congregation. The last survivors of North Creek will face the truth of the Harwick language, and the door that Ezra swore would change humanity forever. The ending is coming. Part 10 The Door in the Pines. Movie camera hook opening for YouTube audience. For months, the people of North Creek lived in fear of the chanting in the forest. But fear was not enough to stop what was coming. In the spring thaw of 1852, the language of the Harwicks reached its final purpose. The door opened. And what came through has haunted the Adirondacks ever since. This is the final chapter. The Door in the Pines. The Door in the Pines. By April, the snow was melting fast. Streams swelled, fields turned to mud, and the ice on the Hudson cracked with thunder. For most communities, spring meant renewal. But for North Creek, it meant the end. Those who had fled told stories to distant towns, but no one wanted to believe them. Who could accept that a 12-year-old boy had built a congregation in the forest? That men and women had abandoned their families to carve symbols into their own flesh? That a language, spoken in unison, could break the world? But the truth was waiting in the Adirondack pines. Elizabeth's vision. Elizabeth Houghton, one of the last true believers in God left in North Creek, awoke one night to find her window glowing faint red. At first, she thought it was fire. But when she peered outside, she saw the glow came from the forest itself. Between the black pines, faint sparks swirled like fireflies. And beneath them, she heard the chanting, the language of Benjamin, rising and falling in rhythms that shook the earth itself. The Reverend was among them. She knew his voice. It rose louder than the rest, sharp and commanding, though it no longer sounded like him. Elizabeth fell to her knees, clutching her Bible, and whispered a prayer. But even as she prayed, she felt the words slipping from her mind, replaced by fragments of Benjamin's tongue. Terrified, she bit her tongue until she bled, forcing herself to stay silent. The procession. The next day, she saw it for herself. From the edge of town, Elizabeth watched as dozens, perhaps hundreds, moved through the pines in a single file. Men, women, children, their bodies scarred with symbols, their eyes glassy and fixed on some invisible point. At their head was Benjamin. He was taller now, his shoulders broadening into manhood. His body was covered in carvings, each scar arranged with deliberate symmetry. His teeth flashed sharp as he smiled, and in his hands he carried one of his father's journals, open, as though reading aloud. Behind him came Delacroix, scribbling symbols into the dirt with a stick as he walked. Behind them, Reverend Houghton, his once proud face slack, his lips moving constantly in Benjamin's language. The procession marched toward the pine hollow. And Elizabeth, against every instinct, followed at a distance. The ritual. The hollow looked different now. Torches burned in a perfect circle, their flames green and unnatural. Symbols carved into tree trunks pulsed like veins, glowing faintly as though lit from within. And in the center, Benjamin raised his hands. The chanting grew deafening, rolling like thunder across the valley. The air itself seemed to ripple, bending as though reality were soft clay. Elizabeth fell to her knees at the edge of the clearing, clutching her Bible to her chest. But the pages trembled, the ink seemed to swim, and suddenly even the words of scripture blurred into shapes she didn't recognize. Benjamin's voice rose above the crowd, steady and strong. He spoke the words of his father's journal, the words Ezra claimed could open the door. And then it happened. The door opens. At first, it looked like a shadow in the air. A black crack, jagged and twisting, forming between the trees. It widened slowly, splitting reality itself, until the pine hollow was bathed in a light that was not light, a darkness that moved like water. From the crack came sound, not words, but vibrations that shook Elizabeth's bones. The congregation fell prostrate, pressing their foreheads to the earth, their voices merging into one long howl of devotion. Something stirred behind the crack. Something vast. Shapes too large to comprehend, limbs that twisted and folded in impossible angles, eyes that opened and closed like lanterns. The air grew foul, the smell of decay and rot so strong Elizabeth gagged. She felt her mind stretching thin, like cloth pulled to tearing. She wanted to run, but her legs would not move. Benjamin stepped forward, arms outstretched, as though to embrace what was coming through. And the thing responded. The intervention. Just when it seemed the world would split forever, a gunshot rang out. From the ridge above, a handful of settlers who had refused to leave fired into the clearing. Bullets struck torches, tearing apart the circle of light. Flames sputtered, symbols broke, and for an instant, the chanting faltered. Benjamin turned, fury blazing in his blackened eyes. He raised his voice in a single, impossible syllable, and every rifle shattered in the settlers' hands, exploding into splinters. But the damage was done. The door shuddered, its edges wavering. The shapes behind it roared in anger, their limbs thrashing. Elizabeth saw her chance. With every ounce of strength, She stood, clutching her Bible like a weapon. She shouted, not in Benjamin's tongue, but in her own. She screamed verses of scripture into the night, forcing her voice to rise above the chanting. Our Father, who art in heaven, deliver us from evil. The congregation convulsed, writhing on the ground as though her words burned them. Benjamin staggered, clutching his ears, blood streaming from his nose. The door flickered. Then, with a sound like 1,000 trees snapping, it collapsed in on itself. The forest went silent. The aftermath. When Elizabeth awoke, the clearing was empty. The congregation was gone. Benjamin was gone. Only the scorched earth remained, marked with a single black scar where the door had been. In the years that followed, North Creek never recovered. Families left, leaving only ruins and whispers. Hunters avoided the hollow, claiming the trees still whispered at night. And Elizabeth, who lived another 15 years, never spoke again of what she had seen. Professor Delacroix was never found. Reverend Houghton's body was discovered months later, hanging from a pine branch, his chest carved with the same symbols. And Benjamin, he was never seen again. But some nights, when the wind blows through the Adirondacks, travelers swear they hear chanting in the distance, low, rhythmic, inhuman. They say the boy never died. He waits still, in the pines, for the day the door can open again. Movie camera closing call to action for YouTube audience. And that, my friends, is the story of the Harwick incident, the boy, the language, and the door that should never have been opened. What do you think? Did Benjamin survive? Do his followers still wander the Adirondacks, waiting to finish the ritual? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this 10-part journey into forgotten history and horror, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more terrifying true stories, and share this series with someone who loves a good scare. Because sometimes, the scariest things aren't in movies or legends, they're in our own past. Until next time, keep your lights on. And remember, the pines are never silent.